Hello, today we're going to look at Hadoop and Mongo blending. The outline for this session will be a quick overview of who I am, having a quick look at the Pentaho data blending techniques, then having a walkthrough of two big data integration techniques, including Pentaho's visual Mapreduce, Mongo extraction embedded within inside of Report Designer, and the Pentaho data integration thin Jdbc driver. After we go through the data integration side, we're going to then have a look at this data within inside the Pentaho business analytics system. My name's John Ballment. I'm a consultant at BizCubed. The last 5 years I've specialized in data integration. I also have a strong background in reporting and data warehouse technologies. Pentaho's been working on their data blending architecture over the last few years, and the architecture is firmly developed around the use of their Pentaho data integration tools to access data from the most appropriate area at the most appropriate time. So here we've got a typical example of what a big data architecture might look like. So down the left-hand side, we've got our different data sources. We've got networking, locations, web services, social media. And then we've got our normal sort of systems, our customer relation systems, provisioning and billing. Now, data integration has normally sat in the middle at the customer provisioning and billing layer to get data into your enterprise data warehouse. And then sitting on top of your enterprise data warehouse is some sort of analytics piece. Usually you've got maybe some data marts or some aggregations inbuilt before it. But what we're talking about here is being able to use the information from that enterprise data warehouse and blend it together with data from other sources, either just in time or inside a reporting framework. So why would you use blending? Mostly to drive a full overview of the area that you're looking for. An example that Pentaho is describing here is being able to look at a customer's billing and usage, and also have a look at issues that they may be having with their dropouts or call qualities, etc. And being able to give this information to a customer service operator when the client rings up and says, I'm having problems with my calls, and being able to say, oh, sorry about that. Look, I can do you a good deal and a bit of a discount for having a problem, and try and stop customer turn and actually maybe increase profitability by stopping the customer from leaving the company. Now, the main point for this data blending is the concept of just-in-time, where we're actually blending these traditional data sources with the big data, but doing it directly against your data warehouse rather than using data marts. Also, you could be doing it directly against your customer data, etc., and using the data integration tool to do that work for you, and then do the analytics inside the analytics suite. Okay, so now we're going to do a bit of a walkthrough about some of these big data techniques, and then we'll have a look at some visualization based on the data that we've built. So, okay, so this is the Pentaho data integration client. And what I've got up here is a job that allows us to go in and load through the data from a weblog and load it up into a Hadoop cluster, do some processing on that data with inside the Hadoop cluster, and then load the results back into a data mart for analytics reporting. So the first section of this is to actually go off and get some files from our web server. So we do that in a transformation. This transformation starts off by grabbing a list of files off the web server, doing a few filters and splitting up the fields so that we have valid information, because our weblogs are formatted as access.datetime.log. So we're splitting out that date time so that we can determine whether we want to load the records or not, which is this filter here to say, is it the date time between the values that we want? And then we're building some quick little scripts to go and grab the files off the server and bring them local to the data integration server. Doing some extracting the files. Once we've got the files on the server, we're actually taking two paths here. One is to generate an aggregated list of files. So this step here actually does an aggregation of the file names that we've found and puts a comma separated value between with their aggregated values. The next part, the top string here, we're putting out the location where we want to put it on site onto the Hadoop file system and where the base folders are inside the data integration server. Now, this job doesn't need to be ran on a data integration server, but I will be using that feature today because the data integration server is sitting on a high-speed network beside the firewall, so I don't have to worry about too much network latency. Once those records are on the stream, I can actually do a check to see, are there any files to process? If there are, then we go in and we just run a basic Hadoop load step. This step looks rather boring if you go into it at the moment, because it's actually getting all of its information from the previous arguments values. So the source files, destinations, wildcards were all built in that previous step. Now, the next part of this job is rather special. We're actually going to open up our Hadoop processing. Now we're going to use Pentaho's visual Mapreduce functionality. So what this allows us to do is utilize our existing skills in building transformations within inside of the Pentaho data integration system and integrate that with execution in Hadoop. Now Pentaho will actually take the transformations that we've built and process them directly on the Hadoop cluster you get a lot of efficiency out of that. So this step here, we're actually going through and we're defining what our mapper process is, what our combiner process is, our reducer, doing a bit of job setup, saying where the files are coming from, where they're going to, and their input and output formats, defining our cluster, and we don't have anything to use to find. So Each one of those mapper, combiner, reducers are simple PDI transformations as well. So if I right click on here and go into mapper, I can see now that the mapper is a straightforward PDI job. Now the special parts on here are these two steps, the Mapreduce input step and the Mapreduce output step. And you'll see these in all of these, the mapper, the combiner and the reducer. And basically what we do is we define what type the key value is and what type the value column is. And in this case, both of them are strings. What we have, if we have a look at the data coming in from our firewall, is we've got these sets of values in there. So we've got an IP address, an identity, user IDs. There's, date and time are split off into two different slices. The actual request people went for, status, bytes, referrer, and agent. Now, for testing purposes, I had originally used just a simple CSV load file to test these values. And again, it was set up exactly the same way, where I had a field that was coming in with the values. Okay. My file has disappeared. And this is a really useful way to do debugging of these Mapreduce jobs. So you can just set them up originally to be CSV file based with some sample data. Go through, make sure that everything works the way you expect it to, and then all you've got to do is input the Mapreduce input-output steps in there. It also shows the flexibility of Pentaho. So if I decided that, you know what, I'm not going to use Hadoop anymore, I'm going to use Hive, or even if I was going to use some sort of high-speed database or MongoDB or something, I can come in here and just remove the Mapreduce input steps and put in a different set of input steps and keep the same business logic. So what I'm doing here is I'm converting some of the codes to integers, checking if the referrer is null. Don't want any, not interested in anybody who doesn't have a referrer. Extracting the base URL, so I'm taking off some of the junky values that are inside there. Removing some quotes from around the date parts and some other quotes. Putting the dates back together because they originally came in two parts. And also making some other elements that might be useful for my data warehouse, including date SK and time SK, which we normally use to speed up the efficiency when loading into the when we're using star schemas. This is a useful step here. This is actually doing Geo Lookup, so this is actually an important step within inside this process. So I'm actually marking up the data that's come out of Hadoop, or sorry, come out of the web log as it's loading into Hadoop and being processed with country information. Once I've done that, Hadoop expects name-value pairs. So my value is going to be my country name, and then I'm going to put all the values back together into a semicolon separated values. And then when I run the combiner, I'll go through and I will split them up the same way as I've just put them back together. So to have a look at the combiner, we can just come back into here, right click on combiner. Okay, again you can see that when I was building this I tested it on CSVs and then I converted over to using the Mapreduce steps. So as I was mentioning before, now I'm doing a field splitter based on the semicolon. So my value that would have come in, my value field will be my country, and then I'll have my big long value string, which I'm going to split up into all its little pieces. I'm using an in-memory group by, basically on the assumption that I should have enough memory to load up the small chunk of data that Hadoop normally processes in each split. So now what I've got is I've got my key field, which will be country, my date and time fields, and my referrer domain are going to be my group by fields, and then I'm going to sum up the counter and sum up the number of bytes. Once I've done that, I'll take the values that I've just generated and again concatenate them together so that I can send them out to the reducer to bring all the values together from the different nodes, processing nodes that this had been executed on. And again, we're just outputting our key and output value. Finally, if we have a look at our reducer, it's very, very, very similar to our combiner. One of the things that I've done here is some sorted rows. This is to account for some of the functionality that you get out of Hadoop by default, which it pre-sorts values together that come out of between the combiner and the reducer. So again, I've got the input, I'm splitting the fields based on what I said I was using. Going in there, doing an in-memory group by to sum it all up again from each of the different locations, concatenating it together and then putting it out to our output. Now our output will go to this output folder with inside our Hadoop cluster. So just so you can have a quick look at our Hadoop cluster. Okay, so in here we've set up our BizCube directory. We've got all our raw files. So this is what our weblog typically looks like. And when we process them, the output looks like this. So I've got my different countries, the date down to the day level, the time and where they came from, number of hits and number of bytes. So we can go in and kick this off just to run the process. I haven't made any changes to these, so I'll just close them and reopen them. Okay, so to process this, I'm going to run it on the server, as I said before, and just put some parameters in here. So this transformation's been parameterized to work with a delta loading schema. And the idea would be is we'd have an external wrapping job for this that would actually go off and say, I know which dates I've already processed, and these are the new dates I need to process. So just hit OK there. Now what we'll find in the data integration server is our job here running. So what we can see in our logs is it's copied one file over, actually two files over, and it's now processing them in Hadoop. Now we can go and have a look in our Hadoop cluster and see what's going on there. So we can see that it's about 50% through the mapping stage. Now this is a single node cluster, so it's not overly exciting or fast, but it's designed just to show the process in here. Some of the nice features in version 5 of Pentaho, in the data integration server, they give you this nice graphical look of your actual transformation, so you can see what everything is and where they are. If you're actually running transformations, they even give you the option to look at data in real time as it's going through the data integration server. So what it's telling me here is it's just finished doing the mapper, and it's doing the reducing, and the reducer side's finished. So if we have a look here, everything's finished on this side. My job's completed. And now what it's doing is it's just loading into the database for me. Right. So while it's finishing doing that, we'll have a look at our next example. So our next example that we're going to show here is how to utilize the Pentaho data integration client or jobs with inside of a report designer report. The interesting side for this is it means that our reporting engine can effectively access any data source that you could possibly think of via the data integration client, which supports a lot of different interfaces, including databases, web services, Amazon S3, Google Analytics. So it's got a lot of different inputs and transformations that you couldn't do inside of a normal reporting engine. And therefore being able to do them in here and just hand up the data to the reporting engine to display makes a lot of sense. So let's go and have a look at what we've got going on here. So the actual transformation that we're going to be looking at is this one here. That's what you get for using history. Examples, MongoDB. Hits by referrer domain. So this transformation is actually going to be embedded inside the data, inside of Report Designer. So what it's doing is it's going off and loading data from MongoDB, and it's actually using a parameter from inside the transformation. So I've got a parameter here called referring site, and what I've done is just selected the server, selected the collection that I'm going to be hitting, and in the query section I've told it to query based on referring sites to limit the data. Once I get that, I'm going to do some cleaning up based on the Mongo data. So I'm going to separate the year, month and day out, do some quick sorting so that I can see everything based on a day and group all the IPs together. I'm actually using multiple steps. So there's an option in Pentaho to change the number of instances, and this actually gives us a fair performance increase because every step inside Pentaho is a thread. Then I'm just merging the output from these 4 instances back together, and this select value is going to be used to retrieve the info. It's going to be the retrieval point for Report Designer. So if we go and have a look inside of Report Designer, okay, so this is my report in Report Designer. It's not overly special, so it's just giving me the date, IP address, the request line, and the byte sent. The interesting thing is here on the data sources. So what I've done is I've actually set up a new data source, being a Pentaho data integration source, and from that I've selected what the transformation is, and then I'm able to select where I'm actually getting my my output values from, and I'm also able to configure the input parameter so that the report's now dynamic. So that report will now, we can publish that off to our BI server from in here and publish it off, and we're going to have a look at that in a moment to see how that report actually executes. So the final example of data blending is the real-time or just-in-time blending. That example was a just-in-time blending example, so getting information directly out of Mongo when we needed it. So that report could have charts on it from the ERP system as well as this real-time data, or it can be put into a dashboard or utilized from a dashboard to show information together about a particular customer all at one time, which is close to the example I'm going to show you shortly. The next example is using Pentaho data integration server as a Jdbc engine. So what it allows us to do is connect any Pentaho data integration transformation as an actual output to a Jdbc driver. So in this example, we originally had a Mongo data source just for the blending purposes, and that was just going off and doing a query and getting all my fields back. Very similar to the example we looked at before. Just for execution speed, because my MongoDB database is not very fast, and I haven't got a filter on here, I've gone and just limited it to 500 records from a data grid. Then I'm extracting my base URL, doing another one of these IP lookups, getting my year, month and date fields, grouping the data together, and then I'm outputting the values that I want. Now, it's a little hard to see, but this little yellow container up here with the tick inside of it indicates that this has been set up as a service. So if I come into the properties and have a look at data services, I can see that there is now a service name called hits, and the output step will be hits by day by country, which is that element there, and that's actually going to be available as a Jdbc service. So if we go back to our data integration server, and we can now see that this job has finished successfully, and it's put into our database an extra 2,500 records. If we go back to here and change this from being status to being list services, I can now actually see a list of all the services that the data integration server are hosting. So this is the service name hits, as we defined before, and this is the metadata, so the fields and types that we're going to be returning. And we'll see how to utilize this with inside the Pentaho business analytics server in a moment. Now this component is available in the open source edition via a cart service. I'm just showing it inside the data integration server as it's more convenient for me, and I can also come in here and actually see some interesting runtime values that come out of using it. Okay, so I've already logged into the Pentaho business analytics server, and what we're visualizing here at the moment is a set of reports inside of a dashboard that actually is built on top of the data that we've processed in Hadoop, or loaded into Hadoop and processed and then output to our data warehouse. The concept is we're showing the external sites or external countries that are been hitting our website the most, and what we can see here is that the United States and India are our two largest countries to access our internal websites, and the color in these instances is the average number of bytes retrieved, whereas we can see India certainly retrieves more data but has less hits, but not significantly. We can go around here, and this is interactive, so if I click on United States, what we then get down in this graph below is all the different referring sites that have come up against our websites, and how many hits we've had from them, and how many bytes they've consumed. So the interesting thing is that many pictures has retrieved more data than what Google has, but Google has certainly given us more hits. And that's also representative here that when we just got the simple traffic by referrers, we can see that Google has certainly given us the most data, and most of these ones are different countries' versions of Google's, which is sort of expected because we're only looking at sites that are coming in from external locations. So if I double click on Bing, what it's going to do is it's going to bring up that report designer report we were looking at before and show us the raw requests that, or references that Bing has taken us to. So we can see here they're going to our wiki and to the tutorials, having a look at things about SSH and RSA keys, report designer, etc. So this is an example of real-time blending, whereas if we were loading the data into MongoDB in real time, which currently not, but we could be, we'd be able to see the data as it's coming through in real time. Then the next element that we're going to have a look at is how to use the Jdbc version of Pentaho data integration. So if we come in here and we have a look, what we've got, I've created a new Jdbc connection, and if we go and edit that, what you can see is I'm using the Pentaho Jdbc thin driver, using a generic database configuration to customize this build, and then the URL is the Jdbc PDI, the server that we're calling, Kettle, which is an old name for the data integration, and the web app name, which is Pentaho Data Integration. Then on top of that, I've got an analysis cube, which basically just reads directly from that data and sets up a basic cube of information. Now, inside the data integration server, we've got a lot of existing calls to this service. So I'm just going to remove them just so that it's clear what we're doing and where it's coming in. So what you're going to find is when we actually execute a transformation, a report in here, it is going to actually generate transformations and execute them on the DI server and then return the results. So if we're going to have a look, we're going to do a new analysis report, and we're going to execute this hits by region. So if I double click on hits, so as we saw before, I've reduced the number of data down significantly, so 500 records is about right, or 540 records. And if we come back into here and have a look at the Kettle service, you can see that it's actually, there's 2 new rows in there. So it's generated these requests to actually retrieve the data. So in this request, it's gone through and it's asked for the data from our data integration server and returned the information to PDI. And then with inside PDI, it's taken this injector step, it's taken the data from the previous step, done a group by on it, and returned a result, which was our value of 541. If I come back in here and add, we'll actually just go back. We'll just remove these two so we can see exactly what it's building and how it's building it. So if we come back in here and put in here country, we can then see what it's done behind the scenes. So again, it's gone off and it's done this service call. which returned the records. And then it's actually done the service call twice, and the returned values have been grouped together. So we've got our injection step, now where filter, and a group by. So the where filter, they've actually just split it up into a subset of countries, and then done a group by on that. And then once it's got the values, it's gone through and done some more filtering on the values to return them. And now we've got blended real-time data from a different data source. Would be very, very useful if you wanted to look at some information about, say, the top 100 records from your existing weblog, or something along that line, so you can get a picture of what's happening right now in comparison to trying to do a large aggregation across all the records off your server. So anyway, that is the presentation. As you've seen, we've had a look at we've walked through using Visual Mapreduce. We've walked through the Mongo extraction for Embedded Report Designer, and we've also had a look at the thin Jdbc driver for Pentaho, and we've visualized them inside the Business Analytics Suite. Thank you very much, and that's the end of the presentation.